Plato's Allegory of the Cave. While you're probably living in a bubble right now and don't even know it, have you ever stopped to consider that everything you believe is real might just be a shadow on a wall? No, I'm not talking about the Matrix, although the Wachowskis basically borrowed this idea from a guy who's been dead for over 2,000 years. I'm talking about Plato, and one of the most brutal ideas in Western philosophy, one that describes exactly how you're living your life right now. Picture a group of people chained inside a cave since birth. They can only look forward at a stone wall. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, people walk by carrying objects, and the shadows of those objects get cast onto the wall. The prisoners watch the shadows and think, this is reality. They name them, argue about them, build entire lives around them. For them, the shadows are the world. Now imagine someone gets unchained. They turn around, see the fire, see the real objects, and realize they've spent their whole life staring at shadows. Their first reaction wouldn't be enlightenment, it would be confusion, pain, and rage. What is this? I was happy watching my shadows. Now say they get dragged out of the cave entirely. Sunlight, real trees, a real sky, real people. At first it's unbearable, but slowly their eyes adjust and they see reality for the first time. Then comes the twist. They go back to tell their friends. You won't believe this. The shadows are a lie. There's a whole world out there. And the chained prisoners laugh. They call them crazy, say the light ruined their eyes. If they push too hard, the prisoners might even kill them, because nobody likes having their reality questioned, especially when they're comfortable inside it. Plato wasn't writing fiction. He was describing you. The cave is your information bubble. The shadows are your inherited beliefs, your unexamined biases, the feed that only shows you what you already want to see. The fire could be the media, your family, an algorithm. Anything that convinces you a distorted version of reality is the only truth. You think you form your own opinions? How many of your beliefs are actually yours, and how many did you simply inherit because of where and to whom you were born? If you'd been born somewhere completely different, would you believe the exact same things? Obviously not, and yet you defend them to the death. Think of the person who only trusts one news source because it's the only one that tells the truth. Ada, or the relative who has fully formed opinions on economics and medicine but has never read a book on either. Shadows, all of it. So here's the real question. If you were unchained right now, would you actually want to leave the cave? Because it's comfortable in there. You know the shadow, you know its name. Out there in uncertainty and nuance, you'd have to admit you were wrong about a lot. And here's the cruelest part. Even after you leave, you probably won't convince anyone else. Try explaining privilege to someone who's never thought about it, or climate data to someone who thinks it's a conspiracy. They'll look at you with contempt, sometimes hatred, because you're threatening their whole sense of reality, and people have killed for less. Socrates, Plato's own mentor, was executed for asking inconvenient questions. The cave isn't just about knowledge, it's about how we live. Your friendships probably mirror the shadows you already see. Your job might be a shadow of the life you actually wanted. Your fears, ambitions, dreams, how many are truly yours, and how many were handed to you? The degree, the body, the career you were told meant success. Shadows, all shadows, and the more you question it, the lonelier you get, because most people prefer the cave. Truth rarely comes with a happy ending. It usually comes with the realization that you wasted years chasing things that didn't matter. So the question Plato asks 2,500 years later and still relevant is simple. Do you want to stay in the cave or not? No right answer, only consequences. Stay, and you live comfortably inside a lie. Leave, and you live uncomfortably inside the truth, probably alone, probably misunderstood. But here's what makes it worth it. Once you've seen the sun, you can't unsee it. Ignorance stops being an option. And maybe that's the closest thing to freedom we get. Not freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom to see the world as it actually is. Now, Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism, and how a Roman emperor with more power than anyone alive teaches you to stop complaining. Imagine being the most powerful man on earth. Armies, palaces, wealth beyond imagining. Anyone who displeases you, you can have executed. And yet every morning you write in your journal, "Today, I will meet people who are ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest. That's not my problem. I can't control what they do, only how I respond." That was Marcus Aurelius. The irony is almost unbearable. The one man with total power spent his free time reminding himself he controlled almost nothing. Meanwhile, you, with a fraction of his power, get stressed over traffic, a rude boss, rain on your barbecue. He commanded legions, while a plague killed millions across his empire and kept his composure. You might lose it because the Wi-Fi cut out during a Zoom call. Stoicism isn't suppressing emotion or becoming a robot. That's the shallow reading everyone lands on. It's accepting that most of what happens is outside your control, and the only thing you truly control is your response. No feel-good affirmations, just raw reality. Bad things happen, people let you down, plans fall apart, and no amount of screaming changes that. You're stuck in traffic, an important meeting in 20 minutes. Option A. Pound the wheel, curse everyone, show up already furious, and still be late. Option B. Accept you don't control traffic, send a heads up, breathe, arrive late but mentally intact. Either way, you're late. The only difference is whether you chose to suffer unnecessarily. Marcus called this the dichotomy of control. Separate what depends on you from what doesn't, and focus only on the former. Sounds obvious, but think how many hours you spend worrying about other people's opinions, the unchangeable past, an unpredictable future. None of it is in your hands, and worrying has never once changed any of it. Most of your suffering is self-inflicted. It's not the situation, it's what you think about the situation. It rained on your wedding. The rain isn't the problem. The fantasy you built around a perfect day is. Epicurus, a Stoic who was enslaved before becoming a philosopher, put it plainly, people are disturbed not by events, but by the meaning they assign to them. You're building your own mental hell, and the narrative, unlike the event, is something you can actually change. Marcus Aurelius's meditations weren't written for publication. They were reminders to himself while commanding wars and watching his empire crumble from plague. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He wasn't philosophizing abstractly. He was surrounded by obstacles and choosing to see them as opportunities to practice virtue, meaning excellence of character, courage, justice, wisdom. The Stoics believed virtue is the one thing nobody can take from you. Seneca, ordered by Nero to end his own life, calmly opened his veins while discussing philosophy with friends, controlling the one thing left when everything else had been stripped away. Bring this to your own life. A terrible boss, you don't control him, but you control whether his rudeness wrecks your day. A toxic relative, you control whether you take the bait. A chronic illness, you control your attitude toward it. This isn't toxic positivity, it's brutal pragmatism, which is exactly why Stoicism has caught on with entrepreneurs and elite athletes. It's a framework for handling pressure without falling apart. Marcus practiced imagining the worst each morning, not out of pessimism, but preparation. If you've already accepted you can handle the worst case, what's left to scare you? Compare that to waking up expecting a perfect day and feeling betrayed by life when it isn't one, which it never is. Seneca summed it up. We make plans for this life as if we'll live forever, yet waste it as if we'll die tomorrow. You postpone hard conversations, trips, forgiveness, actual living, as if tomorrow is guaranteed. It isn't. Stop expecting life to be fair. Stop expecting control over anything beyond your own thoughts and actions. Life isn't a contract, it's chaos, and the only sanity available is accepting what you don't control, acting with virtue on what you do, and letting the rest go. Now, Nietzsche's nihilism. What happens when you realize nothing matters, and what you actually do with that? Nietzsche was not a nihilist. He hated nihilism, considered it a cultural sickness, and yet he diagnosed it more precisely than anyone. And we're living through the exact catastrophe he predicted. Most people just haven't noticed. God is dead, and we have killed him. His most famous and most misunderstood line. He wasn't celebrating. He was announcing a catastrophe. We destroyed the foundation of our value system and are dancing on the ruins without noticing the floor is about to collapse. For millennia, humanity had an answer to why we're here. God, the divine, some transcendent force giving everything meaning. Then came the Enlightenment and science, and slowly the idea of God was dismantled, not out of malice, just because the evidence stopped adding up. Remove God from the equation, and what's left? Nothing, according to Nietzsche. Absolute emptiness, nihilism, the belief that life has no inherent meaning, no objective purpose, no absolute values. Sounds liberating? Nietzsche found it terrifying, because once the moral anchor is gone, what stops anyone from doing anything at all? If there's no objective right or wrong, your morality is exactly as valid as a murderer's. That logic spirals fast into something dark. Look around. How many people live with a quiet sense that nothing really matters, filling the void with streaming, social media, endless distraction? How many work jobs they hate on autopilot, because what else is there to do? That's passive nihilism. Believe in nothing, do nothing, just exist and wait. Nietzsche called this figure the last man, someone who's given up on greatness in favor of comfort and safety. And the worst part, this person thinks they're happy because questioning hurts and accepting mediocrity is easier. But Nietzsche didn't want you to become a nihilist. He wanted you to pass through nihilism. That's the part everyone misses. It's not the end of the story, it's the middle, a valley you cross after God dies, but before you find new meaning. How? By creating your own values, what he called the revaluation of all values. If there's no God to tell you what's good, you decide, you create, you become your own moral legislator. This is the Übermensch, the overman, not about genetic superiority. The Nazis distorted that grotesquely. The overman accepts there's no objective meaning and creates meaning anyway. The artist knows her work has no cosmic significance and paints anyway because she decided it matters to her. That's the will to power, not domination of others, but mastery of yourself, imposing your creative will on chaos. Compare that to the person who goes to church because that's what you do, works a job to pay bills, never once asking, do I actually want this? Nietzsche would call that person a slave to herd morality. And look, questioning everything is exhausting. But as he put it, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Without a genuinely chosen why, any hardship destroys you. There's a concept called amor fati, love of fate, loving your life exactly as it is, all the suffering included, not despite it, but because it shaped you. Nietzsche, who suffered excruciating headaches and eventually lost his mind, wrote that his formula for greatness was wanting nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not for all eternity. Can you look at your life, every mistake and loss, and say you wouldn't change a thing? Most people can't. They live replaying the past or fantasizing about a better future, which is just another form of nihilism, denying the only life you actually have. His thought experiment of eternal recurrence asks, if a demon told you you'd live this exact life infinitely, every pain repeated forever, how would you react? If it horrifies you, you're living a life you don't want. If you'd say, bring it on, you've accepted your existence. Nietzsche was trying to save us from nihilism, not push us into it. He saw religion dying and knew science alone couldn't fill the void, since science tells you how things work, not why to care. Without a new value system, he warned, humanity would fall into existential despair. We're in that pit now. Depression at epidemic levels, people living to 80 without ever really being alive. The way out is simple but brutally hard. Stop expecting life to come preloaded with meaning. Stop searching outside yourself and become the creator of your own meaning, however crushing that responsibility feels. Now, Sartre's existentialism and the freedom you're terrified to face. Sartre landed on one of the worst realizations a human being can have. You are completely, irrevocably free, and that's not a good thing, it's terrifying, because total freedom means total responsibility. Every decision, every action or inaction is entirely your fault. Not God's, not fate's, not your childhood's, yours. And most people would rather die than accept that. Existence precedes essence, the phrase that defines existentialism. Before a chair exists, someone has the idea of a chair, 4 legs, a seat. The essence comes before the object. Now take yourself. You're born, you exist, but you're not born with an instruction manual saying who you are. Only through your choices do you build your essence. You exist first, then decide who you are, or you're supposed to. Nobody wants that responsibility, it's too heavy. It's easier to believe you were simply born a certain way. I'm just naturally shy. I've always been bad with money. Lies, all of it. You choose shy every time you decide not to speak up. Admitting you're actively building the person you've become hurts too much, so you make excuses, hide behind labels and stories about your past. Sartre called this bad faith, lying to yourself about your own freedom. His classic example is the waiter who performs the role so intensely he seems robotic, hiding his freedom behind, "I'm a waiter, so I act this way." No, he chose to act this way, but it's easier than admitting, "I'm choosing this because I need the money and fear getting fired." Sartre said humans are condemned to be free. Condemned, not blessed, because you didn't choose to exist, but now that you do, you're forced to choose constantly, and every choice is a verdict on your character. Think of someone stuck in a toxic relationship who knows she should leave but doesn't. Ask her why, and she'll give 1,000 reasons, all of them excuses to avoid the truth. She's choosing to stay every single morning. She's living in bad faith, and she knows it deep down, but pretends not to, because facing her total freedom is too terrifying. Even your emotions are choices, Sartre argued. I don't choose to be anxious. Actually, you do. Anxiety is a way of relating to the future by focusing on bad possibilities, and it conveniently spares you from having to act. Even your passions are choices. "I just love this person" isn't quite true either. You choose to keep loving them every day, in every act of care and forgiveness. Love isn't lightning. It's a continuous series of decisions, and when you stop choosing someone, the love ends. Sartre went further. You're responsible for the whole world, in the sense that every choice you make is a vote for how the world should be. Don't tell yourself your choice doesn't matter, because you're just one person. Because if that excuse works for you, it works for everyone. And then nobody is responsible for anything. Sartre lived through Nazi-occupied France and saw exactly what happens when people decide they're just following orders. There's always something you can do, even if it's just refusing to cooperate. And here's the most brutal part: you never get an excuse. Our childhood, trauma, poverty, all real, all making life harder, but none of it removes your freedom to choose how you respond. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz and found that even there, people still chose their attitude, some turning into animals, others sharing their last rations. Same circumstances, different choices. There's a story of a young man during the war asking Sartre whether he should stay and care for his sick mother or join the resistance. Sartre listened, then said simply, "You are free Choose. The boy was furious. He'd come for an answer. Sartre replied, "If you came to me instead of a priest, you'd already chosen. Nobody can decide for you, and nobody can take that responsibility off your shoulders." This is where existential dread comes in, confronting your total freedom, the fact that nothing external stops you from doing literally anything, only you do. Most people can't stand that, so they invent invisible chains. I can't do that because of my family, when really nothing is stopping them but themselves. You are nothing fixed. You're making yourself every second. So here's the truth nobody wants. You are completely free, completely responsible, completely without excuses. If you don't like your life, you chose wrong, and the only good news in all this is that you can choose differently starting right now, this second. Now, Epicurus and hedonism. Pleasure is not what you think it is. Hear the word hedonism, and you probably picture excess, Roman orgies, some rich kid burning through an inheritance. And that's exactly why you don't understand it, because Epicurus, who founded this philosophy around 300 BC, lived modestly on bread and water, and said the greatest pleasure was sitting with friends in a garden, talking. Epicurus said the goal of life is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. But he wasn't talking about instant gratification. He meant ataraxia, tranquility of the soul, the deep satisfaction of needing nothing, wanting nothing, suffering from nothing, the opposite of what modern culture sells as pleasure. Someone who parties all weekend, spends money they don't have, posts proof they're living their best life, hits Monday empty, hungover, in debt, already planning the next escape. That person thinks they're a hedonist. Epicurus would call them a fool, because pleasure followed by pain isn't pleasure, it's self-sabotage. He split pleasure into kinetic and static. Kinetic is the burst you feel satisfying a desire, brief and fleeting. Static is what follows. No longer hungry, no longer wanting, simply content. That, for Epicurus, is real pleasure, not the explosion, but the calm after. Modern life keeps you locked in kinetic pleasure, the new phone that thrills for 2 weeks before the next model drops. The relationship that feels intense until routine sets in and you mistake settled love for lost love. The raise that satisfies for a month before you want the next one. It's the hedonic treadmill, because peace doesn't sell and contentment doesn't turn a profit. Epicurus saw this over 2,000 years ago, withdrew from Athenian society, founded a small community called the Garden, and lived simply with friends, genuinely happy, while kings and generals died bitter despite their conquests. He wasn't an ascetic, though. He didn't reject all pleasure. If there's good wine, drink it. Just don't become enslaved to it, because the more you need external things to be happy, the more fragile you are. He wrote that he spat on the pleasures of luxury, not for their own sake, but for the difficulties that follow. Because once you're used to luxury, ordinary things stop satisfying you. Epicurus was also obsessed with friendship, calling it the greatest pleasure of all, greater than sex, food, or achievement, people you can be fully yourself around, wanting nothing in return. He said it's not the help of friends that helps us, but the confidence of their help. Just knowing someone would be there is already enough. Compare that to your 500 online followers, and not one person you could call at 3 in the morning. He also preached staying out of politics, living quietly, focusing on what you actually control. How much of your stress comes from an election, an economy, a war you have zero power over? Unplug, he'd say. Focus on your health, your friendships, your peace. Live hidden was his motto, not out of cowardice, but because the more you depend on public opinion, the more unstable your happiness becomes. He was essentially an atheist, believing gods, if they existed, were indifferent to human affairs, meaning you don't need to fear divine punishment. Just minimize your suffering now. And on death, he gave philosophy one of its most liberating lines. Death is nothing to us. When we exist, death isn't present. When death is present, we no longer exist, so why fear it? You never experience being dead, it's simply non-existence. And non-existence doesn't hurt. Real hedonism isn't about maximizing pleasure, which leads to excess and dependency. It's about minimizing pain, which leads to simplicity and peace. Peace beats any spike of pleasure because peace is sustainable and pleasure isn't. When you see a billionaire miserable despite having everything, remember Epicurus in his little house, content with bread and water and an afternoon with friends. Real hedonism is needing so little that nothing can take your happiness away. Now, Hegel's dialectic, because everything in life is a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. Whether you notice it or not, Hegel was so notoriously difficult that even other philosophers gave up on him. But his core idea is simple and unsettling. Everything is conflict, and conflict generates evolution. Every idea carries the seeds of its own destruction, and from that wreckage something new is born. You have a thesis which automatically generates its opposite, the antithesis, and their collision produces something new that incorporates both, the synthesis, which becomes the next thesis, endlessly. Think about adolescence. As a kid, you believe your parents are always right, that's the thesis. As a teenager, you realize they're flawed and rebel hard, antithesis. If you're lucky, you arrive at synthesis. They're right about some things, wrong about others, and you keep what works. That synthesis becomes the thesis you'll pass to your own kids, who will rebel against you in turn, and the cycle continues. Neither the thesis nor the antithesis was fully wrong or right. They were both incomplete, and only through conflict do you reach something more complete. Hegel called this Aufhebung, a word meaning simultaneously to cancel, preserve, and elevate. It shows up in relationships, idealizing someone at first, thesis, seeing only flaws once the honeymoon ends, antithesis, and if the relationship survives, arriving at a realistic acceptance of a complex person you choose anyway, synthesis. It shows up in careers, the dream job, thesis, the brutal reality of office politics, antithesis, and the mature realization that some parts you love and some you don't, synthesis. It shows up across history too, absolute monarchy as thesis, revolutionary democracy as antithesis, constitutional democracy balancing both as synthesis, which itself becomes a new thesis facing new antitheses today. Conflict, in Hegel's view, isn't a bug, it's the system. Avoid it, and you stagnate. Think of people who live in ideological bubbles, consuming only media that confirms what they believe, blocking dissent, pure thesis with no antithesis, no growth, and when a real challenge to their view finally arrives, they either collapse or dig in harder instead of synthesizing. That's why so much political debate today goes nowhere. People aren't seeking synthesis, they're trying to annihilate the other side. You can apply this to yourself too. You're not a fixed, consistent identity. You're a dialectical battlefield, security fighting adventure, discipline fighting freedom, intimacy fighting solitude, constantly. Every decision is a temporary synthesis between opposing forces, which is why you can seem hypocritical sometimes, not because you're fake, but because you're dialectical. And here's the unsettling final piece. You never reach a final truth. Every synthesis is provisional. Every answer breeds new questions. There's no happily ever after, only and then new challenges arose. That's liberating, because it means you can always keep evolving, and exhausting, because you'll never fully solve your life. So stop chasing absolute consistency, stop avoiding conflict, and understand that every strong position you hold will eventually meet its opposition. And that's not a flaw, it's the design. Now, William James and pragmatism. Forget absolute truth, what actually works for you. James had the nerve to say what everyone secretly suspected. Absolute truth is an illusion, and what matters is whether an idea works. While European philosophers debated abstractions for decades, James asked, "So what, does this change anything?" He wanted philosophy that made a real difference for real people. His core claim, ideas aren't true or false in themselves, they're true or false depending on their practical effects. That's not believe whatever you want, it's that truth is a process, not a fixed state. An idea becomes true when it works, when it helps you navigate reality, and stops being true when it stops working. Newtonian physics was true for centuries, predicting planetary motion and building bridges, until Einstein showed it was incomplete. Yet Newton still works fine for 99% of practical purposes. Truth, for James, is a tool, and you use the right one for the job. Apply that to your life. Believing everything happens for a reason may not be objectively provable, but if it gives you the strength to survive illness or forgive betrayal, it's pragmatically true. Believing life is random and meaningless might also be unprovable, but if it drags you into depression, it's pragmatically false, at least for you. James applied this even to religion, arguing that if belief in God makes someone more compassionate and resilient, that belief is true for them regardless of God's objective existence, a position that infuriated believers and atheists alike. There's an important caveat. The idea actually has to work in practice, not just in your head. You can't believe you can fly and jump off a building. Reality corrects you violently when belief doesn't match fact. James's classic image is someone lost in a forest finding a trail. You don't philosophize about its true nature, you walk it and see where it leads. If it saves you, it was true. But if usefulness defines truth, who decides what's useful? James would say pragmatic truth isn't just what works for one person short-term, it's what works better over time and for more people. Nazism destroyed itself. Ideas that promote cooperation and empathy tend to persist. Believing jealousy proves love might feel useful in the moment, but destroys relationships long-term, pragmatically false. Believing in open communication feels harder at first, but builds real intimacy, pragmatically true. James also noticed self-fulfilling prophecies. Believing you'll fail makes you act defeated and fail. Believing you can succeed makes you act with confidence and improves your odds. Belief changes outcomes, which is why he championed the will to believe. The idea that sometimes you must believe before you have proof, because the proof only appears once you act on the belief, especially true in relationships, where you can't wait for certainty before opening up. This also explains why the same self-help advice saves one person and wrecks another. It's not universally true or false. It works or doesn't, depending on the person and context, and you only find out by testing it. So the pragmatic truth about pragmatism is this: stop hunting for absolute truth, focus on what works, test your beliefs, observe results, and stay flexible enough to change your mind when the evidence changes. Finally, Camus' absurdism. Sisyphus, pushing his boulder uphill forever and smiling anyway. Camus opened his most important essay with a line worth printing on a billboard. There is only one truly serious philosophical question: suicide. Not about depression, about the most honest question there is. Given that life is objectively meaningless, why keep living? And the answer he arrives at isn't grim, it's stranger and more useful than most self-help could offer. Precisely because life has no meaning, it's worth living. Camus saw exactly what Nietzsche saw: no cosmic purpose, God dead, absolute values gone. But he rejected Nietzsche's solution of inventing your own values, calling it another form of running from the problem, forcing meaning onto an indifferent universe. The universe truly doesn't care whether you're a saint or a monster. Stars keep exploding regardless, and you will die, be forgotten, and vanish. There's no escaping the absurd, the irreconcilable conflict between humans needing meaning and a universe offering none. Camus names 3 responses, 2 of them escapism. Physical suicide, fleeing the absurd rather than confronting it, which he rejects as surrender. Philosophical suicide, inventing a transcendent meaning like God or fate to avoid facing the void, which he calls intellectual suicide, numbing the pain with a comforting lie. And the third, the one he defends, revolt, not armed rebellion but looking straight at the absurd, acknowledging it and refusing to run. You don't accept it. That's resignation. You defy it every day through your actions, an act of cosmic rebellion against an indifferent universe. Enter Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain forever, watching it roll back down each time he nears the top. Pointless, endless, no reward. Camus says we must imagine him happy. The boulder is your life. Every day you wake, work a job that doesn't change the world, sleep, repeat. Every problem solved creates a new one. There's no finish line. Even success eventually fades. So why push at all? Because meaning was never at the top of the mountain. It's in the pushing itself. Sisyphus has a moment of clarity walking back down for the boulder. He could despair, but instead he accepts, understanding that the torture only exists if he wishes his life were different. Once he stops longing for an ending, the gods lose their power to make him a victim because he's chosen the boulder. He owns the climb. Apply this to your own life. Hate your job, your Sisyphus. Mourn what you deserve instead, or find dignity in pushing well. Raising kids that never seem to stop needing you, Sisyphus. Despair over the lack of control, or find meaning in each small moment. Trying to stay healthy with no final finish line, Sisyphus. But the meaning is in choosing to show up. Camus lived through poverty, losing his father in infancy, tuberculosis, 2 world wars, the Holocaust. Every reason to become a nihilist. And instead he wrote, "In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer." Because the world offers no built-in meaning, we get to create beauty, connection, joy, not despite the absurd, because of it. If nothing matters objectively, everything you choose to make matter subjectively becomes sacred. Camus was obsessed with living in the present, since now is all you actually have. There's no afterward that redeems anything, no paradise, no waiting for retirement to finally live. So here's the final lesson. The universe doesn't owe you meaning, purpose, or reward. You will die and be forgotten, and nothing you do will matter cosmically. You have 2 options, despair or laugh. See the absurd as tragedy or as freedom, because if nothing matters objectively, you're free to decide what matters to you. Push whatever boulder you choose, and if you push it with love and presence and proud defiance, you've already won. Not against the absurd, which can never be defeated, but against letting it defeat you. That's the only victory there is. We must imagine you happy. Now go push your boulder.